Hey guys, it's Jay Calderon with 12rounder.com here to give you this week's edition of 12-Rounder Radio. So let's not waste any time, not really what I'm interested in here. Let's get you going with some results from the past weekend. We had Marco Huck tying the cruiserweight title defense record of 13 with a strange unanimous decision over Mirko Larghetti. He tied the record that was set by Johnny Nelson. Dennis Boytsov returned with a win. Jalen Love was upset by Rogelio Medina, and a couple other things took place over the weekend. You can check that out in the link below. It'll be entitled Quick Results, so you'll be sure to check that in the description. But it was a pretty slow weekend, but it's certainly building towards quite a solid weekend of action. A little bit more on that later. In any event, it's a bit of a weird week in a sense, because all the things that might be going on or that are being built towards for later in the year or even potentially next year, again, as seems to be the case at least 2 to 3 times a year, completely different runs of this. The talks begin about whether or not Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao are ever going to face each other. It just doesn't go away. It's like those monsters and all those scary movies that are terrible that no one should ever want to watch. You just try to kill it and it keeps coming back and you wonder, why the hell is this happening? And you just, at some point, you just want to see boobs like in those movies. Just at least give me something to keep watching because this is getting annoying. But that's what this fight is. It really is a monster of a fight in obviously more ways than one. If it ever does happen, if it had happened, it would have been huge. It would have been a monster of a fight to sell, to watch, to go to, all those sort of things. Would have been great. At this point, as I'm sure you all know, it has not happened. And it's that sort of monster now where it's just like it won't die. People keep holding on to this dream. But really, it feels almost like people know that it's probably not going to happen. Like I have to feel deep down in my heart of hearts that people have to know this fight is probably not going to take place. And yet they hold on to it, hoping, against hope, that somehow, some way, it's going to take place. The unfortunate news, as it turns out, is that it probably won't. Every bit of evidence points to it ain't happening. From Manny Pacquiao's perspective, he's still a decent draw. He can certainly, with the right opponent, make decent enough money. That's pretty much a guarantee at this point. Not going to make the money he was perhaps in his prime or in the prime of his superstardom, if you will. Not going to make the sort of money that he would make if he were facing Floyd Mayweather, certainly. But he doesn't absolutely need this fight. He doesn't need this fight for the security of his future like some fighters that face Mayweather do. Certain fighters are just willing, they just want the fight. It just brings about certain money and certain contract stipulations that can really lead to some decent money in their follow-up fight even. And the back end of the pay-per-views there and all these sort of avenues in which they can make money just leads people to want to take that fight. Even though they know, I have to imagine, they know they're probably not going to beat Mayweather. Whether or not they admit that is, inconsequential to the fact that regardless of a win or a loss, they still are going to have a pretty decent chunk of money heading their way. Not as much as you would imagine, actually, considering the magnitude of the fight, but when one is clearly the star, that sort of thing is bound to happen. In any event, no, Pacquiao will not make that sort of money. But he does make enough money that if he's going to take on such a lofty fight, it's going to be one of those situations where he and his team, Bob Arum, Top Rank, Michael Conks, all these people, they're going to want certain things that they would prefer in that fight. And that's just not going to work with Mayweather, who really does not need the fight. Because of the way his contract, from everything that I've read, everything that anyone's ever said, the way his contract is structured, it really doesn't quite matter who he faces. He's going to get paid a certain amount of money. It's divvied up based upon fights, and then you have back end again with pay-per-views and every sort of deal that might come in, or, whatever in terms of particular fights. But the fact of the matter is he is pretty much guaranteed certain amounts of money. He could face anyone. To give you a perfect example of that, September 13th, he's fighting Marcos Maidana because it was the rematch everyone said they wanted to see. But really, the fact of the matter is that first fight, while it was fair enough, and if the fighters were getting paid, relatively speaking, reasonable amounts of money, it would have made money. But that isn't the sort of money that these guys are making. In particular, this isn't the sort of money that Mayweather's making. These fights have to be massive in order for that return to really come. You would figure. Again, I'm not in their pocketbooks. I'm not their accountant. I don't know exactly what's going on there. No one really does unless they're checking it out firsthand, of course. But from every report that you read and from everyone that you talk to, it doesn't seem as though this deal has been the absolute best for Showtime, because other than one fight, and that fight being, of course, the Saul Alvarez fight, none of these fights have been the blockbuster events that they sort of need to be in order for that return to come in the way they want to see it come in. And yet, even though that first Maidana fight wasn't what they would have probably wanted in terms of a return, the fact of the matter is they need an opponent. They need someone with some intrigue, some level of something there that challenges Mayweather. And because it appeared that he was, in fact, challenging Mayweather in the first fight, even though that fight wasn't financially as successful as they would have probably preferred, the fact of the matter is it's still going to happen again, because Mayweather's still going to get paid. He's still guaranteed certain dates. Showtime is still going to have to be in bed with him for 2 or 3 more fights, so they do need to keep him happy. They, aside from him and Canelo Alvarez, don't necessarily have huge pay-per-view stars, so it's not as though they have many options in terms of trying to find other ways to generate that money, so they have to take those same chances with Mayweather. And here we are with a rematch to a fight that didn't really light the boxing world on fire in the first place. And it includes the biggest star in the sport. When you look at it that way, it tells you 2 things. Number one, watch how you structure contracts, because it can really come back to bite you in the ass, and it's not always important to win the bidding war, because you can lose out in other ways. But the second thing it tells you is that Mayweather really doesn't need to fight anyone. Because again, while he certainly is going to try and deliver his end of the bargain in terms of selling pay-per-views for whatever reason, his, from an ethical standpoint, he wants to do good business. From a moral standpoint, or maybe he just from a pride and egotistical standpoint, he wants to be able to be that guy when it comes to pay-per-view. And in boxing, let's not make any bit of an argument against this fact. He is the biggest star in boxing. But he isn't delivering those numbers that he would need to in order for those contracts really to make sense, again, according to virtually all reports that I've read. And from the same reports that all of you have read. I know you guys, if you're listening to me, I'm sure you've read everything you can, and that's why you're now listening to my dumbass, because you just need more boxing. So if you're that into boxing, I'm sure you've read the same reports that I have. And again, while that's, from a business standpoint, when it comes to the structuring of his contract, okay, whatever. But what it does tell you is he doesn't need that Pacquiao fight. So here's what you have. You have Floyd Mayweather on one hand that doesn't need the fight, and you have Manny Pacquiao over here who probably needs the fight more, but still doesn't need it so much that he's going to concede everything. And Mayweather likes everything conceded. if I can use such a word. He wants everything his way. He doesn't... Here, look at these 3 things. He wants everything his way. He doesn't want to be questioned, and he doesn't want to work with Bob Arum. Now, you look at him versus Manny Pacquiao, and you consider those 3 things. And please, someone out there, pinpoint a moment in time where Mayweather went against those 3 things, where he didn't have it all his way, where he was fine with being questioned, and when he worked with Bob Arum in recent memory. You point out a time that this happened, and I will take everything I'm saying back. But to get back to my point, you think of those 3 things, you keep those 3 things in mind. And also factor in that he does not need this fight. You factor in that he doesn't need the fight, you keep those 3 things in mind. And you think that if he was to sign that contract to face Manny Pacquiao would certainly not be, I wouldn't imagine, willing to concede everything. So it would be part his show as well. Mayweather would have to work with Bob Arum, and he would certainly have certain things about him questioned, about whether or not he could win this fight, about whether or not it should happen here or there. He again would have to work with someone like Bob Arum, but in this case just anyone that he hasn't been working with that isn't going to necessarily kowtow to his every single want and demand. And he's going to have to deal with that for a good promo run, 6, 7, 8 months, because this is a big fight. They're going to promote the hell out of it. You're going to be happy that fight, if it ever is signed, you're going to be happy when they fight, not just because you've wanted to see this fight, but because that would mean the promo is officially over. It's done. You'll never have to see it again. It just isn't going to happen. But, you know what? No need to be a pessimistic Pete. Okay? Positive attitude, I always say. But, here's a better question. Forget whether or not it will happen. Here's the question you gotta ask yourself. Do you really care if it does? Do you really care anymore? I mean, hasn't the luster on that fight sort of worn off at this point? What is really there? What's left of that fight when you really think about it? Does Mayweather seem as invincible as he did, say, 2 years ago? You know, does he really seem as though he's just completely unstoppable and he hasn't met anyone that has really even challenged him in the ring? No, he doesn't, not really. I mean, you have Alvarez, who had very few but some moments. You had Miguel Cotto, who certainly won a few rounds. You had Marcos Maidana, someone who most people would consider is a far inferior fighter to Mayweather, that took him to the brink probably more than virtually any fighter. Certainly, probably more than any fighter has in recent memory, with maybe the exception again of Miguel Cotto. Does he really seem like that just elusive, brilliant technician that is just seemingly untouchable, rivaling, Whitaker and Pep? No, he doesn't seem like that guy at this point in his career. He still probably beats 99% of the people he fights, but that isn't what we once had with Mayweather 2-3 years ago. You look at Manny Pacquiao, he's been knocked out. He's been hurt by a relatively speaking light-fisted Timothy Bradley. That was in the second fight you watched, I believe, 4th, 5th round. He was wobbled a little bit there by a shot that wasn't even that good a shot, to be quite truthful. He looked decent, but relatively speaking, ordinary against Brandon Rios. He hasn't gotten a stoppage since, I believe, the Miguel Cotto fight, if memory serves. He hasn't even really put anyone in major jeopardy with the exception of Juan Manuel Marquez, but that didn't really pay off for him all that well. So the fact of the matter is, this guy is not exactly who he once was either, 2 or 3 years ago. Now you'd say, well, that levels a playing field. They're both slipping a little bit, just enough where they're still, for both of them, that it sort of equals out, and it's still a competitive fight. Okay, but maybe this is just me. Maybe this is a character flaw within me. But you know what this fight would feel like to me if it happened now? There was this girl, I'll refrain from saying her whole name, okay? Her name was Ashley, though. Okay, I won't say her last name. Went to school with her. And she never really gave me the time of day, and good for her, because she shouldn't have. I was a terrible, terrible human being. But nonetheless, it hurt me in my tiny little fragile heart as I went to school with her, and I always wanted to be with her, always wanted to, I don't want to be too crass here, but I always wanted to do, sexual things with her. I always wanted to, I always wanted her. I always wanted her in my life in some way. That's what I'm trying to portray here, okay? That's what I'm trying to convey, rather. Never happened. She was always busy doing anything else, really. I don't know what she was doing. She never told me. She didn't really talk to me. A couple years out of school, I see her again. And she's like, hey, how's it going, Jay? What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And she's talking to me. Very friendly. Keep in mind, this is maybe the first conversation we've ever had, but she's talking to me like we've known each other forever, which technically we knew each other a while, but not that well. And I know she's lying to me. It's not that I've suddenly got better looking. In fact, quite the opposite. It's even worse, if you can imagine. I'm not great looking. I'm terrible. But, the situation here was, so was she, you see. She wasn't as good looking as she once was. She wasn't as attractive. Even the sort of attributes she once had look terrible to me now. Maybe because I had changed partially as a person, but she was just terrible in all ways. She was a train wreck, and I'm not going to sit here and judge, but she was god awful. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. But I'm not going to judge though. The point is, there was a chance that maybe if I wanted to, if I put forth a little bit of effort, finessed it a little bit. Probably could have got some drinks, probably could have, how do you say in America, had some premarital relations with her. I think that's how I'd put it. I could have done it, I think. I don't know for sure, and it really doesn't matter. Because the fact of the matter is, I didn't want it anymore. I don't like someone treating me as though I'm the last resort. Okay? Not a fan of it, especially when it's not as good as it once was from my perspective. You're not going to come to me when nothing else works and then bring forth a worse product. And that's what Pacquiao Mayweather feels like at this point. It feels like a slightly worse product, and they're only doing it because they're running out of options. And for some reason I resent that. And I know I can't be the only person. I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want them to make money off of me that way anymore. I don't want it. I'd have paid $70 before to see this fight. I wouldn't pay 70 cents for that fight now. I'm telling you now, out of sheer principle, it would be the only fight that I'm not going to watch. I know some people would be like, yeah, right, you still watch. I promise you, I would not watch it. I might watch it later on after it's already aired and there's no way they're making money off me, but I'm not paying a cent. I'm not watching it while it happens. I'm not contributing to their viewership. I'm not contributing to their buy rate. I would not watch that fight. Because they've lost me already. It's over. It's too late. It's gone. It's over. That moment in time. Finished. I'm not going to do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I would feel cheap. I would feel used. And I implore all of you to think the same way. I really do. I'm not saying this just to be silly or anything. Don't let them do this to you. Because you start making these sort of decisions, it affects other decisions in your life. You start letting other people use you in these ways. And don't get me wrong. Everyone's used. If you're not used, you're useless. But you have to pick and choose the people that you allow to use you. And you have to be sure that it's beneficial to you. In this case, it's not. They're using you because that's their only other option that's that lucrative for both of them. Because it's a last resort. And what you're getting out of it is not the fight you always wanted. But the two fighters that you always wanted to fight, fighting now when they're no longer the fighters they once were. You don't need that. It's not right. And it doesn't deserve a single cent of your hard-earned money. Not a bit of it. Don't give it to them. Okay? Just my personal advice. This isn't exactly an advice show. Okay? But just my personal opinion. Don't fall for the trap. Okay? I don't care how good the undercard is. I don't care if they have butt-naked ring card girls. Don't order it. It's not worth it. You're better than that. I know you are. But I digress. In any event, that about does it for part 1. Click over to part 2. We'll be taking a little look at some upcoming fights this weekend. A much busier week, of course. We'll also be talking about the new approach of Adrian Broner's handlers, as well as the very difficult fight that the hard-hitting Lucas Matisse might have on Saturday in Cincinnati. So be sure to click over. Of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. But while you're at it, click over to part 2, and we can finish this conversation up.